Good afternoon, my name is Anthony Ockwell. I'm an economist. I have a Bachelor of Science in Agriculture degree with honours in agricultural economics from the University of Sydney. I also have a doctorate in agricultural finance from the University of Sydney. I have worked extensively in road safety, both in Australia and overseas, being responsible for the road safety program at the OECD for many years. Person is seriously affected, there's a major loss in productivity, income earning potential, which therefore has those serious ramifications on the future of that family associated with their loved one who's been injured in a crash. That was the background to Greg Page contacting me to ask whether or not the methodology we have used successfully in road safety research could be applied to better understanding the cost and enormity of fatalities associated with sudden cardiac arrest. Greg Page, as many of you would know and appreciate, is the former Yellow Wiggle who suffered a cardiac arrest on stage some 18 months, 2 years ago. So therefore, Greg gave me a call and basically it went like this: hey mate, could we apply your methodology to getting a better understanding of sudden cardiac arrest? To which I said yes, on one condition, that the work we undertake through Economic Connections be done on a pro bono basis to support your work through Heart of the Nation and raising the awareness of the importance of the chain of survival. That is basically 3 minutes to try to gain reaction from what is an electrical breakdown in the heart, and how can that electrical circuit be recharged and therefore contribute to survival. In the meantime, while we're passing for that time to secure an AED, a defibrillator, CPR is essential as a starting point while the relevant technology arises. Now, for a serious injury or impact on society, we have very little understanding of what sudden cardiac arrest is. Therefore, we have little understanding of the enormity of the number of people affected, and therefore what is the economic cost. With that in mind, after a little bit of discussion between us, I suggested to Greg that we might be able to work out a better estimate of the number of fatalities, and therefore to try to determine, based on the road safety approach, what is the economic cost. That was a much deeper question than what I had anticipated at the outset when Greg and I first spoke. You may ask, given the enormity of the problem, we should have a decent data source. We do have a good data source, which is the out-of-hospital cardiac arrest registry. However, on a jurisdictional basis, there are good data. The problem is when you come to try to estimate the impact for Australia, you're talking about different years of collection, different states' approaches to collection, the differences between a financial year and a calendar year, and of course some states not having any data collections whatsoever. Our starting point was the Victorian out-of-hospital cardiac arrest registry for 2017-18. We have roughly a large number of fatalities, but we only have something like a 12% survival rate for people who suffer a sudden cardiac arrest. That's huge. That means that of people who suffer a sudden cardiac arrest, 88% we regard or are deemed fatalities. So going back to the cardiac arrest registry data, what do we have? We have estimates of incidents, we have estimates of fatalities, and one point to bear in mind as we talk about fatalities, there is no age group, that is from under 1 to the highest age groups, who are immune from a sudden cardiac arrest. So it covers the whole spectrum. That's an important point in terms of the life years lost. And what are we talking about in terms of life years lost? Very simple. For a male, the expected life is around 81.4 years. So if a fellow dies at 40 as a result of an SCA, the loss is roughly 41.4 years. What's that worth? What's that worth in terms of loss in productivity, the impact on the household, the emotional upset? How do we value that? The evaluation approach is standard practice in road safety, and that's what we used in terms of trying to estimate the economic value of life years lost. So that cost covers the whole remaining span, the 41.4 years of that male who's lost at 40. And so you repeat that for all the age groups from under 15 right through to over 75, working out the discounted value to estimate the total cost. And the base year that we used was 2017-18, primarily because that was about the most recent and decent database that we could apply, and it was also consistent with what Liz Peratz used in her study. However, that's where the story starts to fall apart in terms of trying to come together a decent database for that year right across all jurisdictions. What we did have was fairly good incident rates, that is the incidence of sudden cardiac arrest out of hospital in the community. And that data was pretty much available for different years on a state basis, all bar 2 states. But at the same time, what we tried to do was to have a look at the incident rate on the one hand, plus the fatality rate on the other hand. Now, there is a slight difference in the sense that for the fatality rate collected by the ambulance services, who do a mighty job in this area, we have a slight gap in terms of people who may be presented at hospital who have suffered a cardiac arrest at home. So therefore, you would expect that the number who can be estimated by the incident rate will be greater than those attended by the ambulance services. And that's what we found. So that then led us to 2 estimates of the number of incidents and the number of fatalities. Basically, the number of incidents was around 25,700 per year. The fatality rate, roughly 88%, from the best literature we could assemble. That leaves us with something like 22,700 fatalities per year, every year. That's what we're dealing with. That's a huge cost on society. It's a huge cost on families. So in order to estimate that economic cost, we really felt it most important to deliver an estimate of fatalities on which we could hang our hat. And that's what we did. At the same time, in terms of trying to estimate that economic cost, we continued down 2 streams. One, the incident rate, and the hospital registry database on fatalities. Given, I guess, our slightly greater confidence in the incident rate, that then led us to an economic cost of those 22,700 fatalities in 2017-18 of $51.2 billion per annum to the Australian society. That is a huge figure. In contrast, for about that year, the economic cost of road trauma is about 23 billion, just to try and put it into perspective. You multiply that through, and that figure of 51.2 billion represents around 2.5 8% of Australia's GDP in 2017-18, which is a huge amount. So as a nation, how do we tackle this problem of sudden cardiac arrest? And again, this brings us back to Greg Page and the heart of the nation. Greg's life was effectively saved through the very quick action of bystanders, the application of CPR, and importantly, the direct access and application of a defibrillator, which was by the stage where he collapsed. So how do we try to reduce this enormous toll on families, on society, through better access to defibrillators? How can we make these more readily available? And that then took me into the third area of the study which we undertook, which was to try to determine several options which could be feasible in trying to disseminate more defibrillators across Australia. Greg's objective is to try to have the equivalent of a defibrillator to the tune of around 184,000 units or household units. So therefore, if you have a community in let's say a small rural village, how do we know where the defibrillators are? How can we access them? Can we access them in 3 minutes? That's the critical point. And that also raises another issue in terms of how we achieve equity between rural areas where you have remoteness, you have distance, and the urban situation. They're poles apart. Living in a rural area myself, I know that's the case. Time's of the essence. So, therefore, what we did try to do was to raise 3 options. The first one which I proposed was a trial to be conducted in Victoria. You have a smaller state and slightly higher density population. You have a very good network. It was one of the few states for which I had an estimate of the number of defibrillators available in 2017-18, which was 4,500 units. So therefore the assumption I adopted was, let's say in 2017-18 we had 50% more units available across Victoria. Now for those 4,500 units available in 2017, they contributed to the saving of some 30 lives in that year. So therefore, if we had an extra 50%, how many lives could we save? Now, the important point to bear in mind is that we're not talking about the number of lives saved in 1 year. Once you have a defibrillator on the ground, you have a unit which has a lifespan of around 8 years, based on that technology. So therefore, that unit is in the system for at least 8 years and has the potential to save lives over that 8-year period. What we undertook was a case study based on Victoria as a trial, assuming that you had an extra 50% of defibrillators available in 2017-18. Our estimate from the Victorian registry data was that the defibrillators in that year effectively helped to save some 30 people as a result of access to an application of the defibrillator. So if that be the case, could we push that up to, say, around 300 over the 8-year period? And what would it mean? What we worked out was that for every dollar invested in a defibrillator to increase that number available, the return was approximately $7. And the second option was to consider a major retail chain. And I, in the paper, suggested that we perhaps have a look at a pharmacy chain, and there are several reasons for this. you have many clients coming into a pharmacy seeking heart medication. Pharmacists have a very good reputation and they're well respected, particularly in rural areas. And I think that sort of confidence in the pharmacy sector has been highlighted recently in terms of the distribution of the COVID-19 vaccine, in terms of the very favourable responses for people who were a little bit hesitant now going to the pharmacy, a source of trust. So you have a source of trust, confidence, and you have the know-how within the pharmacy to talk about the defibrillator, explain how it works, and therefore a potential medium for securing that confidence and dissemination throughout a community, but also as a source of collection of units for maintenance, which is critical. These units have to be maintained. Once you have an application, the pads have to be replaced. The battery normally has to be replaced halfway through the life cycle. The recommendation is that you replace the pads every 2 years, so that's 3 sets of pads over a life cycle. So the pharmacy chain to us represents a good option in terms of how you could disseminate, maintain, and give people the confidence in a defibrillator. Now, I guess we did a couple of analyses here in terms of what a break-even point would be. Our estimated cost of disseminating that 184,000 defibrillators was about 1.8 billion. The estimated benefits are 3.4 billion, which gives you a benefit cost ratio of 2. Now, why do I focus on 2? I guess part of our work in terms of my company, Economic Connections, has also been involved with the assessment of infrastructure projects and doing work with some of the big infrastructure players in government. And one of the criteria, as it was for the Road Safety Black Spots program and some of the funding of infrastructure projects, is a BCR of at least 2. So there you have it in terms of that parallel. So the third option that we looked at was a full model developed by Heart of the Nation, which included the acquisition, maintenance, backup, tech development of defibrillators across Australia, and that is a comprehensive model. It involves trying to develop an app so that anyone coming into a town with a passenger who may have suffered a cardiac arrest or playing football, whatever the case may be, knows where there could be a defibrillator. Critical in terms of that 3-minute interval we have in terms of the application. Irrespective of which model we go for, my belief is that that sort of app is essential in terms of community access and minimising the delay in securing an AED for that purpose. Now, it's a more expensive model, as I said, very comprehensive. The costs go up. The costs do go up quite considerably from the third-party pharmacy type model, which was roughly 1.8 billion, up to 2.7 billion. So a significant cost increase. Now, as you increase the cost, that means in order to achieve a benefit cost ratio of 2, the number of lives that you have to save over that 8-year cycle increases markedly in terms of the benefits. Now, in contrast to the 227 lives saved per annum under the pharmacy chain model for a BCR of 2, the number of lives that you would need to save under the Heart of the Nation model per annum would be 333 for a total benefit of roughly 5.4 billion. So that shows you how the orders of magnitude can change as you vary some of those key parameters. At the same time, I think it does clearly demonstrate what is doable under the different models, and how we could proceed in terms of a community to achieve these sorts of outcomes for the benefit of the broader society. We are already seeing, and I had a good chat with a colleague of mine recently, the availability of defibrillators in major office blocks, one per floor. That's a significant step forward. We also have these developments now starting to take place in major retail malls in terms of access, and there's a very good case study in the US which shows the benefit of this type of approach. And I think part of what we're saying here is the need for big players in society to step behind this and to help make it happen. It is an urgent need, it's a huge cost, and I think it's a cost that until we were asked to undertake this work, we hadn't really had a good understanding of the magnitude of it. And that's what the work has been put together for, to try to create this message and to support what is a very worthwhile cause in terms of trying to facilitate the broader distribution of defibrillators for the benefit of all of society.